I'm Anne, co-host of Transparency in Teaching, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Hey, welcome back. Steve here, and today I'm talking with Dr. Lisa A. Riegel. She is the founder and CEO of the Educational Partnerships Institute and creator of the Neurowell framework. Lisa supports organizations through practical neuroscience-informed strategies. So much to learn today. Thanks for listening. Thanks for sharing. Oh, by the way, before you go, it'd be so cool if you helped out the podcast. How could you do that, you ask? Here are 4 ways. 1, you could leave a review at Apple Podbean or my website, stephenmiletto.com. 2, you could go to my webpage, stephenmiletto.com, sign up to receive updates. 3, you could share the links to Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 with your friends, colleagues, and family members. And 4, on my webpage, click on Buy Me a Coffee and donate $1 or $2, to help with the costs of the production of the podcast. That'd be so cool. You are awesome. Enjoy the show.
It's the Education Podcast, your favorite show, with lots of groovy guests and they share what they know. So crank it up to 10 and let your neighbors know that here's another show with Dr. Steve Miletto. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. With Dr. Steve Miletto.
Dr. Lisa A. Riegel is the founder and CEO of the Educational Partnerships Institute and creator of the Neurowell framework. She works with educators, leaders, and organizations to support well-being, engagement, and learning through practical neuroscience-informed strategies that move beyond compliance to sustainable culture change. Lisa, welcome to the show and say hi to everyone.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Hello, everybody.
Well, it's great to have you here. And let's talk about you first, because you have 25 years in K through 12 teaching and consulting. And if you had a time machine and could go back to the beginning of your career, what's something that you would tell you to help you be better at working with kids?
Well, it's part of what I'm doing now, trying to help teachers to understand the brain science behind behavior. Because I think that if we understand the brain science, behavior is the intersection of biology and context. So if we understand the biology, we reframe problems and we come up with better solutions. And then ultimately we can control the context. And that is what I so wish I had known many, many years ago.
That's so cool. I think about this all the time. It's like, okay, if we do a time machine, there's a bunch of stuff I'd want to take back with me before that first day, because it's like I learned a lot since then.
Yep.
Good stuff. All right. So we're going to talk about the importance of brain science and research with what you do. What got you interested in knowing more about and understanding the brain in relation to schools and learning?
So there were multiple factors. One, when I went to do my doctoral work, I was doing it in leadership, but I was really more interested in the human system versus like policy. So I started really studying the social sciences around motivation and engagement and, different personality types and adult cognitive development. And I started realizing that all of the changes that we ask start in the brain. And so why do we not know about our brains? And so I started on that journey. I did a lot of consulting with leaders. I do leadership coaching. I did teacher professional development. And I just slowly started to apply brain science in how I was teaching so that I would be more effective as a teacher of adults and of leaders. And then about 5 or 6 years ago, I was working for a hospital in Ohio, and I was the mental health coordinator for the center of our state, and really got into trauma and some of the biologic changes that happen in our brain with trauma. And it really drove me down the path of the neuroscience and saying, if I know this, then I'm going to be way more capable of helping teachers create systems for students that will help them succeed.
It's so amazing, all that we've learned over the years, and how important, it sounds silly to say it this way, but how important the brain is to who we are and what we do. And you are talking to someone who I'm now getting ready. I just passed my 4th year anniversary of having brain surgery. And
oh, wow.
It's amazing to me what they did. They had to remove a tumor, and not cancer. I'm very happy for that.
Good. Yeah.
But it's amazing to me that after it took me a couple of months to help walking again and being able to go further than, like a few steps out my driveway or something like that. But it's just amazing to me what we know and understand about working with the brain, because they then, they had to, seal it back up, and then they had to, you're hoping that they did everything right, and reattach the way it's supposed to be reattached, because although I probably just opened myself up for a couple of friends who'd be making fun of me with what I just said, but it's good stuff. And so there's so much there. It's such an important aspect of, who we are, and that, working with kids, it's so important that we understand, I would think, a little bit about it.
Well, and that's the thing I think that has made me angry, actually, is like, you think about the science of reading is the new rage in education, and it's trying to align teaching practices to how the brain learns to read. And, the brain didn't just learn to read that way. That's how it's always been learning how to read. We've just now aligned the science to our teaching practices. And we have so much information about how we form perceptions and how our stress regulation system works, and how our brain impacts our biology. And that's the other thing I see, is that we look at the mind, the brain, and the body as three separate things, but they're not. The body impacts the brain impacts the mind impacts the brain, the mind impacts the body. So it's all part of the same system. And so, when I do professional development with teachers, I always start by telling them, this is information that you should know. You should have had deep neuroscience coursework, because at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to do, is influence the brain. And so that's kind of my mission, is to help bridge that gap of knowledge, so that once people understand how it works, all of a sudden they're wearing a new set of glasses and they see their practices differently.
That's so awesome. I love it. All right, so let's talk about your organization. You're the founder and CEO of the Educational Partnerships Institute. Tell us a little about the Educational Partnerships Institute. What's its purpose?
So we work to engage in transformational change. That's really, at the end of the day, I want people to be happy and healthy and successful, both students and employees. And so we do strategic planning. My role that I'm kind of known for is the implementation planning, because I engage that human system, and how do we help support people as they make change. And then I also do a lot of work with brain science. I do keynotes, I do workshops, and then I take like maybe 5 or 6 clients a year that I go deep dive. These are clients who say, we really do want to apply this and make change. And so I work with them and kind of do leadership consulting and coaching, and I walk them all the way through the process so that they can plan it, they can engage people in the change, and they can sustain it. And then I do a little bit of work with parent engagement as well. Again, any part of the human system I'm interested in influencing.
Very cool. That's it's so important. It's just amazing. Just some of the aspects of. It's a powerful device that's in our skull that we seem to now in recent times become a little more respecting it. I guess is where I'm going with that, and which is much needed. All right, so you have created the Neurowell framework. Can you share a little bit about what that is?
Sure. So the Neurowell framework basically applies the brain science in the culture of a school. So it promotes the idea that we need safe, supportive, and proactive schools. So safety, we oftentimes think of physical safety, but I promote the idea that we should really be thinking about emotional safety and intellectual safety, because when we don't have that sense of safety, then from a biology standpoint, our brain senses danger. And when it senses danger, it gets the stress system involved. And when the stress system gets involved, the part of the brain that we need kids to be using in their, the thinking part of the brain slows down or is completely absent. So the safety piece is important. And then the second piece is around student agency and power sharing and relationship-based instruction. And so, I work with schools that like behavior plans are not aligned with brain science in most schools. They're just tattletale plans for kids. They don't build skill building and agency into the way that they're creating these plans. So they don't become a learning plan. They just become kind of a documentation plan. I also talk a lot in the supportive aspect of Neurowell around just teaching and instruction. We've talked about differentiation for 25 years, but I spend a lot of time in classrooms and I see a lot of whole group teacher-led instruction that is not differentiated. And so for whatever reason, that transformation has not stuck. And so I work with schools to say, how do you actually create these intellectually safe, supportive, and power sharing cultures in your classroom? And then the last one's proactive. And, this one, I always, when I'm working with teachers of like elementary school kids, I'm always like, okay, can you predict that kids are going to roll around on the carpet and poke each other? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, okay, then why are you angry when they do it? And if they have a need to move, why aren't we being proactive and building in routines? And so the Neurowell culture is safe, supportive, and proactive. And we have 3 tools to use. We have routines, we have the way that we teach, and we have the way that we build relationships with kids and give them a sense of belonging and a voice.
That's awesome. And I had to stop from interrupting you, which I've gotten better over the years. I'm really, because that's so cool what you're talking about is that if we know they're going to do this, why do we get, why do
we get angry? Right.
Exactly.
Right.
That's one of the coolest things about working with kids is that there are certain things that you can't expect because, at some point, hopefully you were a kid and you might know those temptations to take advantage of that situation like that. Everyone wants to sit on the color square on the carpeting. That's the different one or something, it's
well, and I think the other thing that is troubling is that when we started connecting student data, like test score data with teacher quality, we really shifted the focus of teachers away from I teach kids to I teach content. And what happened when that shift occurred is that now if you're a child who's neurodivergent or immature or just not interested, or if you've got impulse control problems or ADHD or any of those things, now you're not a puzzle to be solved. You're a pain because you're going to impact my data. And so I really try to help educators have the freedom to go back to I teach kids because that's more fun than teaching just content.
Oh, you got that right. That's there's so much. That's what makes teaching not boring.
Right.
Because if you're bored as a teacher, something wrong there.
Yeah. And in today's world, this is something else I talk a lot about is that the purpose of school is kind of shaky right now. Like originally school was to help you read so you could vote. Then it became be a Renaissance man and know a little bit about everything. And that's when we started dividing up content and transmitting content to people. Well, then the internet came along and now we have AI. You don't need somebody to teach you content. You can have personalized content come to you in any form you need. And so that purpose of spending 8 hours a day transmitting content doesn't make sense anymore. I mean, you still need to have some teaching, but not 8 hours a day. Then you had, okay, well, content isn't king anymore. So now let's move to career pathways. So we got into the workforce development and the pathways. But again, with AI, I read something the other day that 60% of the jobs that will exist in 10 years currently do not exist. And so when we create these really concrete pathways and certifications for kids, we're kind of certifying them on a road to nowhere because, and nobody really knows what the jobs are going to look like. So one of the things that I try to get schools to think about is what are the thinking skills that kids need in a post-AI world? And, they need to be able to critically think and problem solve. They need to be able to get along with people and socially engage. They need to find their passions and have hope. They need to, all these other things so that when they get out in the world, they're capable with the skills they need to fill the gap between what AI can do in an automated way and what it can't. So we need to bring the human factor back into our purpose.
It's so important. It's like how we go about forgetting that. I don't get. It's like because
part of it's we measure what matters, and if we measure it, it matters. And currently, right now, we measure reading and language arts and math and the core content areas. So we're still measuring the outcomes of a purpose that's 2 purposes ago. And then they add on to there, we'll measure how many certifications you got, students, and that's your success measure. So that's another thing I do when I'm working with schools is how do we create success measures for the human side of what we're trying to do. And a lot of schools have like portraits of a graduate and those describe the characteristics aside from the academic and technical competencies that make them ready for the future, but we don't measure them. We don't have any kind of strategic way to teach them or measure them. And I was working in a school last week, and we were talking about this, and the task for the high school teachers during this late arrival was you need to define critical thinking and try to start creating a rubric that would measure, like, when are you approaching expectations? What are your expectations? When do you exceed them? And in 2 hours, they couldn't come to a definition. And so when you think about that, we don't know where we're going. We're never going to get there. And I think that's the reason this system has shifted so much, is because what we're measuring is not aligned with what we're saying we believe in.
One of the things that it always makes me think of when we talk about stuff that like this is that kids are human beings,
Yes.
which means that they have these different needs, whether it's to play outside and be on the playground where you have whatever the latest structure is that they might possibly fall and skin their knee off of or something like that. But they have other needs too, and they have they start noticing things like, they get upset because someone took their pencil box, or they realize that they'd really like to have so-and-so as a friend, but so-and-so is a friend with somebody else. And these other things are going on. For example, especially by the time you get to middle school, in my case, junior high, and you really start noticing someone else. And there's, it's like, forget you guys. I am talking about this young lady over here, this one over here, and oh yeah, there's a teacher talking to me.
Yeah.
And I think that some of the stuff that you're talking about is so important to realize that they are humans.
Yeah,
So,
they're humans first. And I think the other thing to realize is that people go through different things in their life at different rates. And so I tell teachers all the time, plant the seeds. It's a worthy cause to plant the seed, but you might not be with this student when those seeds start to grow. And so we have everybody, and again, it's an irony in the age of differentiation and, student engagement and all of this, we really kind of herd them together in a pack. And we expect all of them to be developing at the same rate. And, if you've got trauma, or you've got, mental health issues, or if you come from a really chaotic context, because remember, it's biology and context, that context impacts the development of your biology. And so we don't give kids the differentiation that they need from a social aspect either. And then we set them up to fail. And then unfortunately, when they come to school and they're not doing well, they develop an identity that they're a bad student, and then it exacerbates. Then we put the behavior plan in place that only tattles on them and is negative in nature. And then you end up with kids not being engaged at all, or dropping out, or, becoming that I call them frequent flyers, that cost the system a lot of money. I mean, those kids, some of the schools, they'll call me in to work with their complicated orders. And, those kids have like 3 adults that are running around after them every day. And you just add that up, and it's just so inefficient. But if you understand the brain science and you put in a Neurowell culture, fewer of those kids are going to act out, and you're going to have better use of your resources of the adults in the building, because they're not going to be chasing them down. And then the adults get dysregulated, and then they dysregulate the kids, and it becomes kind of a hamster wheel.
you got that right. I think
It's kind of chaotic in schools. I've been in a couple schools, and there's been some chaos going on. And I've looked at one of the principals, and I'm like, no one would, but like, people who don't work in education would not believe the shenanigans that go on in a school day and what teachers are trying to do to help wrangle these kids, and the kids are out of control. I mean, they would not believe the experience of a day in the life of an educator. It's exhausting. And that's where also for educators, I think it's really important. The 3 main goals out of Neurowell is that we teach kids, but first ourselves, to be self-aware, which means we understand how our brain works. We have some self-reflection. We need to be self-regulating and learn how to calm that body down, learn how to be the boss of our brain and tell the rest of the brain how we want it to work, rather than letting our limbic system run our lives. And then the third is self-control. And if you have self-awareness and you have self-regulation, you have self-control. And if you don't have self-control, you have anxiety, which then causes problems. And it again becomes a cycle of trauma and mental health in your workplace.
It's just amazing thinking about some of this stuff, especially from either the student or from the adult, because obviously if both student and adult are dysregulated, we got a lot of problems getting ready to happen.
Yeah. And I've had actually quite a few schools that have had me come in to work with the adults because they work in tough schools and it is a stressful job to teach. It is one of the most stressful jobs out there. And their staff is burned out and, they're having issues with retention or quiet quitting because of the way the education system's set up. And so they've had me come in and work with them on how do you as a leader, because at the end of the day, the leader in the building sets the culture and supports it and grows it. And I always tell people, culture's not words, it's actions. So we spend thousands of dollars to create these fancy words and cute little taglines and things, and we put them all over the building and we get little bracelets made. But we don't tie, what does this look like? What do I see and hear when we're living this culture? And so I work with them on operationalizing those concepts. And I just actually, my new book just came out. It's called Aspirations to Operations. And it's exactly that. How do we take the dream and operationalize it through the planning phase, through the engagement phase, and through the sustainability phase?
That's awesome. I love it. And by the way, you just beat me to the punchline. I was going to ask you at some point to tell us about books that are on the way. So, so thank you. Aspirations. Yeah.
Aspirations to Operations. And it's called A Leader's Guide to Making Transformation Stick.
Love it. Love it. That is, and much needed right there, by the way. So good stuff. So let's talk about another one of your books that you have out that's called Neurowell, Applying Brain Science to Build Safe, Supportive, and Proactive Schools. Why would a classroom teacher and or school building administrator want to read your book?
Well, for a few reasons. One is I hear people not understanding why kids are so different today. So the first part of the book goes through all the contextual factors of growing up now that are actually changing the structures in our brain. And so they are different today than they were 10 years ago, 15 years ago, based on the context that they're living in. And then the second section really goes through the brain science that teachers can use to be more wise about what they're seeing in the classroom. And then it's jam-packed full of all different things you can do. It's not that hard to make the shift. It's not like you have to do everything differently. So it gives them concrete actions they take to be safe, supportive, and proactive. And then there's a section for parents. So one of the reasons I would say read the book is because most teachers, and I have a lot of friends who are teachers, they're exhausted. They're tired, they're burned out, they're worried about kids, they don't know what to do. And if you create a Neurowell culture in your classroom, you're going to have more time, not less time. I worked with a school, we did a total school transformation, and it was under the foundation of Neurowell, or I guess over the foundation of Neurowell. And they had, the math teacher called me in April and said, I don't know what to do now because we're finished. And I go, what do you mean you're finished? And she said, we finished the whole curriculum. And this is a school for at-risk kids. They had gotten all the kids through the curriculum by April. And it was because she had really set up the routines and teaching and relationship building in a way that she got out of their way and let them soar.
A lot of what this makes me think about is how when we are learning to be a teacher, when we are learning in the next step, we've been a teacher and we're going to make the next step in as a school administrator or something, there needs to be time spent on understanding, and seeing if we can correct maybe things that we've learned wrong or something like this about the human being, the children that are in our schools and our school settings, and us also, and how we interact with them. And it's interesting listening to, and I can only imagine as you talk with people who are overwhelmed or who are, because they've quite not figured out how to make that connection or work with the children on where the children are now. Mm-hmm. What do you think is there something that you're asked more frequently or something that you see more frequently that's something you have to address when you talk with schools or school leaders and such?
Well, I think that two things. One is that when we think about ourselves as a teacher or as a leader, like I used to teach at Ohio State in their leadership program. And, they're always like, oh, you have to write a leadership platform. And I always thought that was the dumbest assignment. I was like, a leadership platform can be one sentence. I'm a leader, people follow. Because if you're not having anybody follow you, you're not a leader. So a leader, it's not about you, it's about what your team needs in order to be successful. And you need to adapt to the needs of your team. And it's the same thing with a teacher. We have them write teaching platforms, and it's all about them. And even, their evaluation system is like the teacher performance kind of thing. And the reality is, I think you should be looking at the students, because I don't care what the teacher has to do. If I walk into a classroom and the students are learning and engaged and doing what they're supposed to do, then whatever that teacher is doing is right, because students are learning. So I think there's that piece that's just the mirror is on ourselves versus looking out to the students. And that causes a lot of problems. And then the second problem is the idea that we are so strapped for time in schools. It's, I got to get through this curriculum. I got to get through this content. It doesn't matter if there's complete pandemonium going on in your classroom. The teacher's still up there teaching because they have to get through the content. And I think we need to take a shift away from compliance and control to make school a place where you teach kids how to be part of a community. So like one of the things I talk about in the book is setting up your classroom as a learning community. And I used to teach the hardest kids, and people were like, I don't know how you teach those kids. I loved them because they were real. They'd tell you exactly what they think. And I set my classroom up and I would say, okay, our mission in this classroom is to learn. You have a right to come in. We are a learning community. You have a right to come in and to say, I don't want to learn today. Everybody has a bad day. It's fine. If it happens all the time, we're going to have a conversation, because the purpose of being here is to learn. You do not have the right to take that away from anybody else in this classroom. And that was my whole classroom management plan. And I would go in and I might say, hey, Stephen, do you think what you're doing might make it hard for other people to focus? And then 9 times out of 10, you'll be like, yeah, probably. Okay, well, can you stop? Because you can choose not to learn, but you're not allowed to take that choice away from other people. And then I used that consistently over time. And so then it became one of those, hey, Steven, and you'd be like, yeah, can you? Sure, thanks. And that was it. That was my whole classroom management, because it made him self-aware. They had a replacement behavior. They had self-control, and it was not about them. And I always say to teachers, I'm like, and to students when I'm working with them, you're not the main character in every chapter of this book. Sometimes you're a supporting character, and that just blows kids' minds when you say that. And I'm like, so right now I need you to be a supporting character, and later you can be the main character. And then they're just like, oh, they've never considered that, because the whole world is about them. So I think it's just, shifting that culture and shifting that mindset away from my job is to teach kids to march in a line and to fill out paperwork and to do what they're told and to not talk. And, if you sit in schools for like a full day, it is exhausting that you sit and you just listen, and then you get like 2 minutes in between class. And then one of the things I talk about in the book is the worst thing, bell-to-bell teaching. No, you don't have to teach bell-to-bell. Imagine going to a professional development day where you are taught moment to moment with 2 minutes in between. What would the teachers do? They would be talking over the presenter. They would be looking at Facebook. They would be doing, because we don't have the attention span to be that focused all day long, every day for 40 hours a week. And so I think some of it is just taking that step back and saying, let's really look at this system. It is not a system that would even work for a mature adult. Why do we expect it to work for an 8-year-old?
That is so powerful right there. And, I've heard you talk about the bell-to-bell thing, which is awesome, because, as a teacher, I'm coming up through the days where that's, being hammered into you. And it's just one of those things that it really, because you're so right. And each class, if you're in a high school, for example, if you're in a traditional high school, you have different bosses over each, and so they all deal with it differently too.
Yeah. I actually talk about that, because I say, if you have a Neurowell culture, it's a culture across the organization. And what I see very much so in high schools, it gets a little bit better as you go down, but even in the elementary schools, it is every room is a different kingdom with different customs, with different laws, with a different sheriff, with a different, and I always say to teachers, imagine if every period of the day you had a different principal with a different rubric, with different expectations, judging your teaching performance. You would be a nervous wreck all day long, right? And so creating kind of that collective identity of like, this is who we are at this school, this is what it means to be a student here or a teacher here, and then building that across those classrooms. And people can be different, you don't have to be, copies of each other, but having some shared understandings of what's important and how we do business, and then letting teachers put their own personal flair and personality into their teaching.
That's awesome. All right, so we're going to shift gears just a little bit here, and I'm just going to focus you on a couple of different little topics that I've either heard or you mentioned or I've seen and read your words on. So let's start with this. Could you share how neural pathways are formed and why repetition matters more than motivation?
Yes. So our brain is like a giant highway with lots of on and off ramps. And we develop those on and off ramps through repetition over time. So like even as young as when a baby first realizes when it pulls its gum or its lips away from its gum, everybody goos at it and says, oh, he's smiling, right? After a while, a baby learns and it becomes automatic. When they want attention, they smile and everybody coos at them. And so you see babies walking around in stores with big smiles at all the strangers and stuff because they know it feels good, right? So it's repetition and the experience of getting attention and warmth and smiles is positive, and they repeat that. So we have lots of off ramps in our brain that are not positive, like I'm so stressed, I'm going to go drink, or I'm really stressed, I'm going to go eat, or somebody looked at me wrong, I'm going to punch them in the face. And so we have these learned behaviors, and they're like an exit ramp that's paved with shiny concrete, super smooth, easy to use, right? Because they've been used. When we ask somebody to change their habits, we are asking them to take a plot of grass where there currently is no exit ramp and to go over it and over it and over it until it becomes flattened down, paved, and automatic. And it takes a lot of energy. And in fact, there's 7 different conditions that need to be in place for us to actually create that new neural pathway. And the first one is we have to know where to go. Right. So if you and I decided we were going to get healthy and we're going to lose some weight in 2026, I'd say, okay, we're not going to go to the Mexican restaurant and drink margaritas and eat 4 bags of chips. We're going to go down the street to the Golden Corral. And you would be like, right, that's not the replacement behavior. So we have to know where to go. I have to be able to say, we're going to go to the vegetable restaurant. We're going to eat vegetables. And then we have to have the ability to try things, to be uncomfortable, to try things that we've not tried before. I'm going to look at this and be like, what is this? And I have to put it in my mouth. That's weird, right? So it's uncomfortable. We also have to have the self-awareness when we're headed toward those exit, not to go to the Mexican restaurant, right? We have to have the self-awareness of like, no, this is what I want. And so I'm going to keep driving down the road to the right place. And when you think about taking grass and turning it into an exit ramp, it takes energy. Like our brain is using energy to create those neural connections. So how do we get energy? Well, one way we get it is through positivity. So that's why everybody's addicted to social media. You get like dopamine hits every time somebody likes stuff that you do. So if you've ever thought about like you've lost 15 pounds and you feel really good and not one person says you look nice or gives you any kind of, your energy goes back down. And then when your energy's not up, you're like, I'm just going to go through the drive-through, and you go back to the comfort food. And then you and I we'll fall off the wagon and we will end up back at that Mexican restaurant. But a really important distinction is made at that point. It's either that was fun, but we got to go back to the vegetable place and we've got to do that because that's better for us, even though this was comfortable and I really enjoyed the food, right? Or we say, we're never meant to be healthy. I'll see you here next week. And that's what most people do. And that's what we do to kids. We don't give them the tenacity to forgive themselves, and we don't give the persistence to build that pathway that takes time, and we don't give them the support of positivity. So like when I work in schools to do behavior plans, I talk about how do we develop, these 7 conditions are kind of built into some of the tools that I use with schools, because ultimately we want kids to know where to go, have the energy and the persistence to do it, and all the positivity and support they can to make sure that they get that path, because eventually that new exit ramp will be so smooth and the other one will be kind of unused, so it'll get grown over. And then you still might go that direction, but it's not automatic and it takes more effort to do the bad behavior than the good.
I appreciate you talking about that. It is it's so amazing how our worlds are like that. And I like what you're talking about. We are going to fall off that wagon and end up at that restaurant. So
We will, yeah. And that's, think about, it's not just kids either. I mean, it's how we, like, that's why, 80% of people don't make it through 30 days of a New Year's resolution.
Yes. Well, I love what
just wanting different doesn't make different happen.
Right. I love what you're talking about. Just the idea that that was a rough day. So maybe oh, what the heck? Yes, I'll be okay today.
Yeah. Or you start that pathway of I'm going to treat myself because it was a bad day, and you reward yourself with the food.
There you go.
Yep.
All right. Let's look at another one. Something you talk about is rewiring leadership and team systems to make change sustainable. So what's key here?
So in the new book that just came out, Aspirations to Operations, I go through an 8C framework for leaders. And I talk about the most important thing is that culture, which we already talked about. Like, it's not words, it's actions. And so how do you create a culture on your team? And then it goes through, there's 3 planning C's. So there's clarity, coherence, and cadence. And when I work with leaders, it is amazing to me how many times they cannot clearly articulate what they want. So like, I was working with a district that's working with personalized learning. They've spent tens of thousands of dollars on training in personalized learning. And so I said, well, what do I see and hear when that's happening? And nobody knows. So it's like, okay, if we don't know where we're going, we're never going to get there, right? So that clarity, and then it also is overwhelming to your teachers because you're telling them to do things and they don't even know what it is. And then the coherence piece, the same district had personalized learning as their initiative, but then they purchased curriculum that was direct instruction. So how do you want me to do this when I have one? I'm going to fail either way, right? And then people disengage. And then that cadence is everybody doesn't change. And this is where the brain science comes in. What are the resistors to change? And there's reasons people don't want to change that have nothing to do with right now. So we form in our brain, the way our brain forms perceptions is also through repetition. And so we have these perceptions in our brain from an early age. Like, for example, I grew up in a home that was like, if I came home with an A-, it was like, what happened? What's wrong? So I have a very high achievement filter in my brain. And so if somebody were to come to me with critical feedback, the first thing that it's going to do is dysregulate my body because I'm going to feel right back like I'm 8 years old getting yelled at because I got an A-, right? So if you have staff members who have that high achievement orientation, then when you start to do coaching or, then you run into conflict. Like, let's say you and I work and we go to our boss and I tell the boss, he's never supporting me. He's always correcting me. He's always bugging me about what I'm doing and telling me to do it different. Generally, the leader will solve that problem. They'll solve what happened. But with the brain science understanding, they can go a step below and figure out why it happened and change the conditions that will prevent it from happening again. And then the other piece so those are the first 3 planning C's. Then there's engagement C's, which is collaboration and coaching. And I talk about sort of the science behind how we interact with people and how to coach people based on different, I have a couple activities I do on reasons for resistance and that you need to be a different leader depending on which quadrant people are in. And so kind of going through and saying, how do we construct the collaboration and collaboration in schools? I always say got to balance autonomy and accountability. And what I see a lot of times is structure, they have shared planning time or something, but they have no idea what a success metric is for what they're doing. And so they just talk or they sit or they go off on a tangent. So I give some tools on how to structure collaboration and decision-making, how to come to consensus. And then the final C's are communication and celebration. And that's the one that is always kind of sad to me, that we forget to celebrate. But if we don't have clarity of what we're trying to accomplish, we don't know what to celebrate. And so we end up with, we're doing a teacher appreciation lunch. You guys are all great. And they enjoy the lunch, but it doesn't serve to build collective efficacy or changing behaviors. So I work with leaders to use this whole system, and it's based again in the human system instead of the policies. And when they enact all of those C's, they can make transformation stick.
That is so amazing. It's at each one of those steps, though, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, man, can I start all over again?
Yeah. Well, and it starts with what I said earlier. You have to have the adult, you have to have self-awareness, self-regulation, and self-control. So a good leader is aware of their own triggers and their own things that annoy them. They're able to remain calm in conflict, which that's what a leader does. You deal with conflict all day long, and that they have control. And so they are strategic about how they are implementing change, but it's through the lens of what do those people need? Not what do I need to say, but how do I craft this change in a way that people feel safe, supportive, and I'm being proactive.
That's awesome. All right. So let's take another step into neuroscience here. You note that by applying neuroscience, you can help an organization reduce burnout and improve performance. How does this work?
So I think at the end of the day, it goes back to that 8C framework, right? If I'm in my car, if I'm a teacher and all I ever hear from the leader is about how our gaps in our data are stagnant and they're not moving in the right direction, and it's just, you guys need to do more, you guys need to do this, you guys need to personalize learning or use this curriculum or do this or do that. But I'm not clear on what success looks like when I'm doing what you're asking me to do. And I actually did an evaluation one time. There was a program at Ohio State. It was called Physics by Inquiry, and it was a K-12 program, and they were teaching teachers how to use inquiry pedagogy to teach kids physics. And so I had the opportunity to go in all these classrooms, and I was in this one classroom, and the teacher was the best example of inquiry learning I've ever seen. It was amazing. And I said to her, would you allow me to come in and record you? Because this is really great. And she was like, oh, I don't know if I'm doing it right. And how sad is that? And so that clarity piece is so critical, because if I get in my car at the end of the day and I don't have a checklist of like, hey, if I did this, this, and this today, I feel pretty good about my day. And then the reality is if the metrics we're watching don't change, then it was our theory of change that was wrong. But it doesn't mean I failed. It means that what I was doing didn't work. And so I think there's part of that to prevent burnout. I also think it goes back to the dopamine. We need energy. Change takes energy and changing practices. And so we need reinforcement. We need that dopamine hit. We need to be recognized. And I hear teachers so many times, and they'll say, well, I don't need recognized, but I'd just like to be appreciated. I'd like to be seen, right? That I just recognized for the fact that I'm putting so much effort in. And the problem is sometimes the effort they're putting in isn't aligned with what the changes that the leader wants to see, but because there's this mismatch in communication and the system isn't set up for that, they either burn out or they get grumbly, or they just say, I'm doing what I want to do. I'll shut my door. This too shall pass. And I think also, the fairy dust in any organization is collective efficacy. And so if you can build collective efficacy in your teaching staff, and that's built through celebration, through collaboration, through coaching, all of those pieces, if you develop that collective efficacy, then you can move mountains. But when you don't, you end up with a lot of resistors and a lot of people that just kind of wait you out.
So powerful to understand. And anyone who's been in those roles of working with others, leading others, teams trying to accomplish whatever it is you're trying to accomplish, know very well that if you're going to end up in that land that you're going to get stalled out, I guess is my point.
Yeah. Well, when I hear leaders say things like, my staff hates meetings, no, they don't. They hate dumb meetings and they hate useless meetings. And that's a leadership challenge. That's not your staff. People will come and collaborate when there is true meaning that they get out of it and when it's structured and facilitated in a way that it moves them forward. But we've all sat in those meetings. I have some friends that work, they're IT people, and we were on vacation and they have their weekly huddle. And they just put the huddle meeting on and we played cards. They're like, oh, it's a waste of time, but I have to log in. So that's a leadership problem, right? Or if the leader says, oh, my staff just, they just won't follow. They can't do this. They can't put anything in place. They don't like change. Again, that's a leader problem. And early on in my career, my first teaching job, I was so lucky. I was in a school where every resource was shared. We had tons of collective efficacy. Everybody just did what they needed to do for kids. There was just no question. And if you had asked me at the time, how important is the principal? I would have been like, not at all. I don't even see her. It's not important. Now I realize she had set up the conditions to elevate her staff.
Nice.
And then we had a couple really horrible principals that didn't know what they were doing. They were micromanaging, they were not communicating, they were not clear, they were not celebrating. And I watched the exact same people that I had taught with, who I had so much respect for, turn into the whiniest bunch of people who hated their jobs, and all they did was complain. And it was the leadership factor. And that's why I studied leadership when I went for my doctorate, because I was like, how can this be so hard? And then I realized it's actually very hard.
Very much so. That's pretty cool, though. That inspired you to do that. That's
Yeah.
You run into that, and it's really going to have an impact on your thoughts about ways things should be and stuff like that, I guess is my point.
Yeah. Well, and at the end of the day, we can all be happy, healthy, and successful. We can all do it, but we have to understand how to be happy, and that involves that self-awareness and self-regulation. And we have to understand how to take control of our brain. We have so many people in this population, teachers and non-teachers, that their life is being ruled by the unconscious part of their brain below their nose, that limbic brain, and they act impulsively. I mean, think about just the violence you see on airplanes, and the Karens in the store, and the people who just have no self-control when they're slightly uncomfortable. And so we have a real epidemic with this. And I think that's part of my mission is like, hey, you want to be happy, healthy, and successful? I can help you do that, but you have to want to make the change, because at the end of the day, you have to pave new exit ramps in your head, and it takes time and energy and focus.
Just amazing. I like that. I could talk with you about this subject for a while. I could tell you that. All right. Let's talk about this. Could you explain how habits slowly become your identity?
Yeah. So those thinking habits that we get, they create kind of perception filters in our brain. So if you think of how our brain, we have all the, context and biology, right? So if you think of reality like a banana, and we have all these filters in our brain, and the filters say the world is safe, or the world is dangerous, or people are kind, or people are not. So those repetitive experiences we have make connections between the stimulus in the environment and how we emotionally feel about it. And so what happens then is you've got this like banana, and I always use the example of like a spaghetti strainer, right? And you've got hundreds and hundreds of spaghetti strainers. And if you take that banana and you push it through the strainer, it's still a banana, but it doesn't look like a banana anymore. And so our perception is the new banana to reality. And so when you think about how we have to create, like how our identities are formed, they're formed through the way our brain links together sensory associations. And so if you and I are somewhere and I look around and I see that somebody is side-eyeing me, and my brain associates that with feeling left out, negative emotions, or being angry, then that becomes a belief within my brain. And it's a filter through which all reality goes. And so we end up creating these identities. And, even right now, one of the things I talk about in the beginning of the book with the contextual factors is like, when I grew up, I watched Little House on the Prairie and Happy Days, Laverne and Shirley, and, things that were about like being kind and helping your neighbor and being part of your family and saying you're sorry when you screwed up. And today's world, the kids are watching like, hey, you and I are going to get together and we're going to manipulate that person and vote him off the island. Like it's a totally different worldview that they are inundated with. And it's one that says people are not kind and the world is chaotic and dangerous. You watch the news, you watch all this information our brain is processing, and it's repeated over and over, and it creates one of those filters. And then you have social media, which everybody knows is the devil for people's brain health. And you've got all the, this reliance on dopamine. And what happens with that is you got to think of like risk reward. if I can just change my profile picture to a flag or a cancer ribbon or something like that, I can get 4,000 likes. That's 4,000 hits of dopamine. So low risk, high reward. But if I'm in a brick and mortar place and you fall down and I help you up and you say thank you, I get one. High risk, I don't know, you could have hauled off and hit me in the face. I don't know who you are, right? So higher risk, really low reward. And so we're seeing kids in situations now where that context is impacting their belief system and their identity in the world. And then the last example, there's a whole bunch of them, but the last example is really around the medical field. If you watch TV today, you would think everybody in this country has like rashes and diabetes and schizophrenia and erectile dysfunction and like all these problems. We are a society of labels. And so it's like if you go into the doctor and you say, I've just had so much anxiety lately, they go, oh, well, you have anxiety, and they give you a pill. If you went in and said, I have heartburn, they say, well, let's figure out why you have heartburn. And then they diagnose the problem. But in the mental health world, they look at the symptom and they name the symptom as the disease. And so now I can't tell you how many kids I meet. Within 5 minutes, they've told me all their diagnoses. And so their filters, those colanders in their brain through which the banana is going, are the world is chaotic and dangerous. I am diseased. I am out of control. I have mental health. All of these negative filters, and it's impacting their identity in the world.
It's just so amazing, the different lessons that are there for us that we need to pay attention to and understand as we interact with each other. Because what we do at school is we're all about, we work with our colleagues, and we work with our students and the children and the families and all the additional personnel that are there. There's so much interaction going on, and if we have very little understanding of how we are as humans and the interactions and how to really make a difference or to just mess it all up.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I kind of visualize Neurowell as, like a giant bubble over the school. And it's like when you walk through the doors of that bubble, it is positive and supportive. It is, the solution to pollution is dilution. So if you can create a space where you are creating repeated experiences of positivity and agency and kindness and community within the school structure. And my gosh, we have them 8 hours a day. So you can certainly do the repetition and experience. What that does then is it confuses your brain because it's adding those filters in there that says, hey, people are nice. So now I go into a novel situation and my brain goes to look for an association and it goes, well, I have some that are negative and some that are positive, so I don't know how to feel. So let's ask the CEO of the brain to weigh in. And then you can reason and you can use logic, where if you just have negative filters, your brain goes, danger, danger, hits the stress button and says, hey, CEO, go get a cup of coffee. You're not needed right now. So part of being, self-aware and in self-control is this process of being able to tell this part of your brain telling the limbic system how it wants to run, as opposed to the other way around.
That's so awesome. I appreciate you talking about all this. We're getting close to finishing up, Lisa. And if someone wanted to follow up and connect with you and or learn more, where would you send them?
Yeah, so they could come. I'm on LinkedIn. And then I also have a website called lisariegel.com. And then my EP Institute, it's educational partnership. So it's epinstitute.net. So there's plenty of ways they can get in touch with me. And I would love to, if schools, if anybody's listening who says, hey, our school's ready for some transformation, I can help you do it. And it's not as hard as you think. It just has to be intentional. Yeah, it has to be intentional and informed.
Very cool. Thank you so much. I got one last question for you, and it goes like this. Do you have a teacher in your past who made a difference in your life? If so, who was it? What would you say if given the chance to say thank you?
I do. Her name was Gail Tankersley. She was my senior year writing teacher, and my confidence was shot my junior year. I had a teacher who did not care for me and made that clear, and had basically told me I was a terrible writer and just had shot my confidence. And Tankersley used to have us do a journal every week, and we could write anything we want. And it became just kind of a private conversation between the two of us. And she would take, I can't imagine how much time this woman spent, but she would write me back like big, long life lessons about like, I hear you, and I felt that way before. And here's, when I was angsty at that time. And she really helped me get on a different pathway to feel good about my skills and also about myself as a human. And here I am later. I've written 5 books. So to the other lady.
Yeah, that's so awesome. Good stuff. Lisa, thank you so much for talking with us about the Educational Partnerships Institute, the Neurowell framework, your book, Neurowell, Applying Brain Science to Build Safe, Supportive, and Proactive Schools. By the way, tell them one more time what the new one's that's coming out soon.
It's Aspirations to Operations, a leader's guide to making transformation stick.
Very cool. We're looking for that one. And what an awesome focus you have. Thanks so much. Wishing you the best in all you do.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Hey, you have been listening to Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12, a podcast to help you help kids achieve their dreams. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is a member of the Education Podcast Network. Podcasts for educators, podcasts by educators. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is a member of the podcast network based in Canada called Voice Ed Radio. Voice Ed Radio, your voice is right here. The opinions expressed on Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 are those of the guests and host. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is intended to share ideas, advice, and suggestions. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is produced for educational purposes. Hey, thanks for listening. It would be awesome if you visited my website at stephenmiletto.com and connected with me, left a review, and listened to more episodes. And by the way, you could also share it with your friends, with your family, and your colleagues. Thanks so much. You're awesome.